Good morning, boys and girls. We are going to read another chapter. Today we start part 2 of Black Beauty. Remember that Black Beauty moved in the first part, in the last chapter that we read together. So do you remember who he moved with? Ginger. That's right. So Ginger and Black Beauty are both going to this new home, and they are sad to leave, as everybody else is as well, but we'll see what the new home is like in chapter 22, which we're going to read today. So let's start chapter 22. Now, the next morning after breakfast, Joe put Merrylegs into the mistress's low chaise to take him to the vicarage. It's where Merrylegs is going to go. He came first and said goodbye to us, and Merrylegs neighed to us from the yard. Then John put the saddle on Ginger and the leading rein on me, and rode us across the country about 15 miles to Earl's Hall Park, where the Earl of W lived. So this is their new owner. He lives at Earl's Hall Park. There was a very fine house and a great deal of stabling. And by the way, with this, a lot of times in older, especially English books, they will take out the actual name of the person, and usually it's because the person, like the people who have that type of name, that specific family name, they have a problem with their name being in a book like this. So that's why it's just blocked out. Now, there was a very fine house and a great deal of stabling. We went into the yard through a stone gateway, and John asked for Mr. York. It was some time before he came. He was a fine-looking, middle-aged man, and his voice said at once that he expected to be obeyed. He was very friendly and polite to John, and after giving us a slight look, he called a groom to take us to our boxes and invited John to take some refreshment. So what do you think of this man, Mr. York, so far? He's kind, he's polite, but he speaks in a way where he expects to be obeyed, so he's probably very strict. So we were taken to a light, airy stable and placed in boxes adjoining each other, where we were rubbed down and fed. Sounds pretty similar to their experience before, so far. In about half an hour, John and Mr. York, who was to be our new coachman, came in to see us. Now, Mr. Manley, he said, after carefully looking at us both, I can see no fault in these horses, but we all know that horses have their peculiarities as well as men, and that sometimes they need different treatment. I should like to know if there's anything particular in either of these that you would like to mention. Well, said John, I don't believe there is three, and right grieved I am to part with them, but they are not alike. He says they're both wonderful, but they're not similar. Now, the black one, Black Beauty, is the most perfect temper I have ever known. I suppose he has never known a hard word or a blow, which means a hit, since he was foaled, and all his pleasure seems to be to do what you wish. That's a wonderful compliment of Black Beauty. But the chestnut, who's this? Ginger. But the chestnut, I fancy, must have had bad treatment, which we know is true. We heard as much from the dealer. She came to us snappish and suspicious, but when she found what sort of place ours was, it all went off by degrees. For 3 years, I have never seen the smallest sign of temper. And if she is well treated, there is not a better, more willing animal than she is. And that's very true and kind. He's saying she has a bad temper if people mistreat her, but if people are kind to her, she's a very good horse. But she is naturally a more irritable constitution than the black horse. Flies tease her more, anything wrong in the harness frets her more, and if she were ill-used or unfairly treated, she would not be unlikely to give tit for tat, which means if somebody hurts her, she's going to hurt them. Black Beauty wouldn't do that, but Ginger would. You know that many high-mettled horses will do so. Of course, said York. I quite understand, but you know it is not easy in stables like these to have all the grooms just what they should be. So he's saying, there might be some people who work here who are not going to treat the horses very well. I do my best, and there I must leave it. I'll remember what you have said about the mare, meaning Ginger. They were going out of the stable when John stopped and said, I had better mention that we have never used the check rein, or bearing rein, that's the one that holds the head high. We've never used it with either of them, John says. The black horse never had one on, and the dealer said it was the gag bit that spoiled the other's temper. And that was the bit that was here that really tore at Ginger's mouth. Well, said York, if they come here, they must wear the check rein. Uh-oh, we know how Ginger feels about this. I prefer a loose rein myself, he says, and his lordship is always very reasonable about horses. But my lady, this is the Earl of W's wife, now that's another thing. She will have style, and if her carriage horses are not reined up tight, she wouldn't look at them. I always stand out against the gag bit, and shall do so, but it must be tight up when my lady rides. Both of them are going to have to start wearing that rein that holds their heads far, far back and high up. We remember that Squire Gordon had a problem with this before because he said if soldiers didn't have full control of their bodies in war, they're not able to fight as well, just like horses can't work as well if their heads are tied up like that. I am sorry for it, very sorry, said John, but I must go now or I shall lose the train. He came round to each of us to pat and to speak for us, to us for the last time. His voice sounded very sad. I held my face close to him. That was all I could do to say goodbye. And then he was gone, and I have never seen him since. Now the next day, Lord W came to look at us. He seemed pleased with our appearance. I have great confidence in these horses, he said, from the character my friend Mr. Gordon has given me of them. Of course, they are not a match in color, but my idea is that they will do very well for the carriage while we are in the country. Before we go to London, I must try to match Baron, the black horse. I must try to match Baron, who is another horse that they have. The black horse, I believe, is perfect for riding. Oh, I'm sorry, the Baron is the one who is going to be riding Black Beauty. Now, York then told him what John had said about us. Well, said he, you must keep an eye to the mare, which is the female horse, Ginger, and put the check rein easy. I dare say they will do very well with a little humoring at first. I'll mention it to your lady. Now in the afternoon, we were harnessed and put in the carriage, and as the stable clock struck 3, we were led round to the front of the house. It was all very grand, and 3 or 4 times as large as the old house at Birtwick, but not half so pleasant, if a horse may have an opinion. So Black Beauty thinks this is a huge mansion, but it's not actually as nice and pleasant to be at as Birtwick Park was. Why do you think that is? You think it's because of the people there? At Birtwick Park, Black Beauty was treated with kindness by everybody, so that's probably the difference. Now 2 footmen were standing ready, dressed in drab livery, with scarlet breeches and white stockings. Presently, we heard the rustling sounds of silk as my lady came down the flight of stone steps. She stepped round to look at us. She was a tall, proud-looking woman and did not seem pleased about something. But she said nothing and got into the carriage. This was the first time of wearing a check rein, and I must say, though it certainly was a nuisance to not to be able to get my head down now and then, it did not pull my head higher than I was accustomed to carry it. I felt anxious, but she seemed to be quiet and content. Now the next day at 3 o'clock, we were again right at that door, and the footman as before. We heard the silk dress rustle, and the lady came down the steps, and in an imperious voice she said, York, you must put those horses' heads higher. They are not fit to be seen. And when York got down and said very respectfully, I beg your pardon, my lady, but these horses have not been reined up for 3 years, And my lord said it would be safer to bring them to it by degrees, meaning this check rein holds it up maybe here one day, and then a week later, just a little bit higher. And eventually, they'll get used to wearing it the way it's going to be the expectation for all of the horses. So that is a way of making it a little less painful, even though those check reins or bearing reins are always going to be painful on the horses. So Mr. York continues, but if your ladyship pleases, I can take them up a little more. Do so, she said. So York, he wants these horses to be comfortable, but he has to follow the orders of the lady. York came round to our heads and he shortened the rein himself, one hole, I think. But every little bit makes a difference, be it for better or worse. And that day we had a steep hill to go up. Can you hold your head back like this, like the bearing rein or check rein would have it? And then imagine climbing a hill. When you're climbing a hill, like a steep hill, usually your upper body and your head is kind of pointed forward. And so that is the opposite of what you would want, to have your head back like this as you climb. So then I began to understand what I had heard of. Of course, I wanted to put my head forward and take the carriage up with a will, as we'd been used to doing. But no, I had to pull with my head up now, and that took all the spirit out of me. And the strain came on my back and legs. When we came in, Ginger said, now you see what it is like. But this is not bad, and if it does not get much worse than this, I shall say nothing about it. For we are very well treated here. But if they strain me up tight, why, let 'em look out. I can't bear it, and I won't, Ginger says. So Ginger says, right now, this is uncomfortable, but at least they're treated right. But if it gets worse, Ginger is not going to take it. Now, day by day, hole by hole, our bearing reins kept being shortened. And instead of looking forward with pleasure to having my harness put on, as I used to do, I began to dread it. Ginger, too, seemed restless, though she said very little. At last, I thought the world days, there was no more shortening. And I determined to make the best of it and do my duty, though it was now a constant harass instead of a pleasure. But the worst was not yet come. So Mr. York seems like a nice enough person, right? But where's the problem mainly coming from? The Earl of W's wife, the lady, she's the one who really wants horses to look very fashionable, and she doesn't care about how they feel. And sadly, everybody has to follow what her directions are. So that is the end of chapter 22. What do you think of his new home so far? Doesn't sound comfortable, but it's also not terrible. In general, he's got good food and he can rest when he's not working like he was with Ginger just there. Okay, that is the end of this one. We've got notes to take on it, just like usual. And tomorrow we'll read chapter 23, hearing a little bit more about the bearing reins and all of the ways that they're getting used to this new home. I'll talk to you later. Bye.